We caught an earlier flight. Grandpa is at gate 3, curbside. He is your problem now. Do not call us. I read the text message my mom sent exactly 5 minutes after my dad handed me his debit card to go buy coffee. I looked up. The curb was empty. Their SUV was gone. I spun around and saw my grandfather, Anthony, sitting alone on a metal bench. He was shivering in a thin windbreaker, clutching a garbage bag of clothes. I ran over and knelt in front of him. Grandpa? He looked at me, eyes cloudy. Angelina? Where did Jonathan go? He said he was parking. I checked the flight tracker on my phone. Flight UA 987 to Paris. Status: boarding. My parents were already on the plane. They thought they had finally dumped the burden holding them back from their dream life. They didn't know they just left their father with a forensic auditor who knows exactly how to track a paper trail. Before I tell you how I turned their vacation into a prison sentence, drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I stood there for exactly 10 seconds, watching the flight status blink on my screen. Boarding. My chest felt tight, like a band of steel was crushing my ribs, but I forced myself to breathe. In my line of work, panic is a liability. You don't scream when you find a discrepancy in the ledger. You document it. I turned back to Grandpa. He was shivering violently now, his hands gripping the trash bag so hard his knuckles were white. Grandpa, I said softly, reaching for his pockets. Do you have your wallet? Your ID? He shook his head, his eyes darting around the busy terminal. Grace took it. She said it was safer with her. For the flight. Of course she did. They hadn't just abandoned him. They had erased him. Without ID, he couldn't board a plane even if he wanted to. Without a wallet, he was just a confused old man in a windbreaker, a John Doe waiting to be processed by the system. If I hadn't come back, the police would have found him, run his prints, and eventually put him in state care. By the time the system identified him, my parents would be in Paris, claiming it was a terrible misunderstanding. A senior moment where he wandered off. I stood up. I saw an airport police officer patrolling the curb about 30 feet away. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight up to him. Officer, I said, my voice steady. I need to file an incident report for elder endangerment. Right now. He looked at me, then at Grandpa shivering on the bench. He pulled out his notepad. I gave him everything, my parents' names, their flight number, the time they dropped him off. I made sure he logged the exact temperature. 19 degrees. 10 minutes later, I had a case number card in my pocket. It wasn't an arrest warrant, not yet. But it was paper. And paper is the most dangerous weapon in the world, if you know how to use it. I ordered a rideshare. When the car pulled up, I helped Grandpa into the back seat. He leaned his head against the window. Exhausted. Are we going home, Angelina? He asked. No, I said, checking the GPS. We're going to Tennessee. My apartment in Chicago wasn't safe. Jonathan had a key, and I didn't put it past him to come looking for documents if he suspected I was interfering. Aunt Teresa lived in a cabin 4 hours south. She was the only one in the family who hated my father as much as I was starting to. As we hit the highway, the heater humming, I looked at Grandpa in the rearview mirror. He was asleep, his mouth slightly open. He looked frail, harmless, and then I remembered the spreadsheet. 2 weeks ago, I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off some tax forms. I found my mother, Grace, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open. She was so engrossed she didn't hear me walk in. I glanced over her shoulder. It wasn't a budget. It was a valuation projection for Grandpa's lake house. Column A listed the estimated market value, $850,000. Column B was titled, Maintenance Costs. But it didn't list roof repairs or taxes. It listed Grandpa's medication, his doctor visits, his specialized food. At the bottom, there was a formula. It calculated how much his net worth decreased for every month he stayed alive. He is costing us $3,000 a month, Grace had muttered to herself, hitting the delete key on a row of expenses. It is like bleeding money. I had frozen, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They didn't look at him as a father. They looked at him as a depreciating asset, a line item that was eating into their profit margin. I looked back at the road, the city lights fading behind us. The airport wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a liquidation strategy. They had done the math and decided that the cost of abandoning him was cheaper than the cost of keeping him. They were cutting their losses. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands hurt. They thought he was a liability. They forgot that liabilities can be audited. And I was the best auditor in the state. We pulled into Aunt Teresa's driveway just as the sun was beginning to bleed over the Smoky Mountains. It had been an 8-hour drive, fueled by adrenaline and truck stop coffee. Teresa was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan. She didn't ask questions. She just opened the passenger door, helped Grandpa out, and guided him inside with a gentleness I hadn't seen in years. "He is safe here, Angelina," she said, handing me a mug of tea that smelled like cinnamon and whiskey. "Go to sleep. We will fight them in the morning." But I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the mist roll off the lake, my phone resting on my knee like a loaded gun. At 9 a.m., it vibrated. Jonathan calling. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to remain still. I knew why he was calling. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't concern. It was fear. I had done a background check on my own father while Grandpa napped in the car. It turns out, Jonathan's investment genius was actually a series of high-risk margin trades on tech stocks that had tanked 3 days ago. He had a margin call due Monday morning. If he didn't cover it, the brokerage would liquidate his remaining assets and come after his personal accounts. He needed that house sale money. He needed Grandpa gone so the sale could go through without a hitch. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello? Angelina." His voice was tight, high-pitched. "We just landed. We have been trying to call the airline. But, look, is he? Did you hear anything?" He wasn't asking if Grandpa was okay. He was fishing. He wanted to know if the airport police had taken custody. If Grandpa was in the system as a ward of the state, Jonathan was safe. He could claim ignorance, let the state warehouse him, and sell the house remotely. This was the moment to scream, to tell him I knew everything, to threaten him with prison. But I didn't. I used the gray rock method. It is a technique I learned dealing with hostile audit clients. You don't give them emotion. You don't give them drama. You make yourself as uninteresting and flat as a gray rock. Narcissists feed on reaction. If you starve them, they get careless. "It is chaotic, Dad," I said, my voice dull and heavy. "I don't really know what is happening." "Did the police call you?" he snapped. "I think so," I lied, keeping my tone monotone. "There were a lot of people. It is just a lot right now. I cannot deal with this." Okay, he said, and I could hear the tension draining out of his voice. He interpreted my flatness as defeat. He thought I was overwhelmed, crying in my apartment, useless. "Just stay by the phone. Let the authorities handle it. We will figure it out when we get back next week." "Okay," I whispered. "Don't do anything stupid." "Angelina." The line went dead. He thought he had won. He thought I was paralyzed by the crisis, leaving the board wide open for his next move. 10 minutes later, my phone pinged with an Instagram notification. I opened the app. There was a new photo on my mother's feed. It was a selfie of her and Jonathan on a balcony at the Ritz Paris, the Eiffel Tower sparkling in the background. They were holding crystal flutes of champagne. Jonathan looked relaxed, smug even. The caption read, "Finally free. New beginnings." I stared at the timestamp. Posted 2 minutes ago. They were celebrating. They believed the problem was solved. Grandpa was lost in the system. I was too weak to fight, and the money was guaranteed. I logged into the banking app linked to the family trust, the one they thought I didn't have access to, because they forgot I set it up for them 5 years ago. Pending transaction. Ritz Paris, Les Badon. $5,200. They were racking up debt on credit cards, confident that the $850,000 wire transfer from the house sale would hit their account on Monday to wipe the slate clean. They were spending money they didn't have, banking on a sale that hadn't closed yet. I took a screenshot of the transaction. They were so confident. They thought the game was over. They didn't realize that by making them feel safe, I had just encouraged them to walk onto the trapdoor. I stood up and walked into the kitchen where Aunt Teresa was making eggs. "We have work to do," I said. "We need a notary." The next morning, the sun broke over the Tennessee hills, clearing the mist. Grandpa Anthony was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing a bowl of oatmeal. This was his golden hour, that window between 8 and 11 a.m., when the fog of dementia lifted and he was sharp, present, and undeniably himself. "These eggs need pepper," he said, pointing a fork at Aunt Teresa. "And you still burn the toast." Teresa smiled, but her eyes were wet. "I missed you too, Dad." I placed a folder on the table. Inside were 3 documents I had drafted overnight on my laptop. A revocation of power of attorney, a new durable power of attorney naming me as his agent, and a formal affidavit stating he was of sound mind and not under duress. "Grandpa," I said, sitting opposite him, "do you remember the house by the lake? The one you built?" He nodded slowly. "The blue one, with the porch that faces west. Jonathan wants to sell it," I said. "He wants to sell it while you are not looking." His expression hardened. The confusion vanished, replaced by the stubborn pride of a man who had worked 40 years at a steel mill to buy that land. "Over my dead body." "We can stop him," I said. "But I need you to sign this." It takes the power away from him and gives it to me. Can you do that? He took the pen. His hand shook slightly, but his signature was bold and heavy. Anthony J. Miller. We drove straight to the county recorder's office. The building smelled of dust and old government paper. I didn't want any ambiguity. I wanted a timestamp that would hold up in federal court. We stood at the counter. The clerk, a woman named Barbara with reading glasses on a chain, reviewed the documents. She stamped them with a heavy, satisfying thud. Recorded at 10:14 a.m., she said, handing me the certified copies. That stamp was the line in the sand. As of 10:14 a.m., my father had no legal authority over Grandpa's assets. Any action he took after this minute wasn't just unauthorized. It was criminal. We went back to the cabin. I opened Grandpa's iPad. I didn't need to hack anything. I had set up this tablet for him 2 Christmases ago, so he could video call me. I knew the passcode was my birthday. I opened his email app. Since Jonathan was acting as Grandpa's agent, all official correspondence from the title company was being copied to Grandpa's primary account. There it was, an email from Lakeside Title and Escrow, sent at 2 p.m. Subject: urgent. Affidavit of authority required for closing. The email was standard procedure. Before releasing funds, the title company needed the seller to swear, under penalty of perjury, that the power of attorney was still valid and had not been revoked. It was a DocuSign link. I sat there, watching the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. If Jonathan was smart, if he was even a decent criminal, he would call the county clerk to check the records. He would verify his status. But Jonathan wasn't smart. He was greedy, and he was desperate. At 4:03 p.m., the notification changed. Status: completed. Signed by Jonathan Miller. I opened the completed PDF. There was his digital signature, time-stamped nearly 6 hours after we had recorded the revocation. He had just sworn a false oath to a financial institution to obtain nearly $1 million. He thought he was finalizing a sale. He didn't realize he had just signed a confession to bank fraud. Got him, I whispered. Monday morning in Chicago meant late afternoon in Paris. It was closing day. I sat at the kitchen table in Aunt Teresa's cabin, my laptop open to the family trust's banking dashboard. Beside me, Grandpa was napping in his recliner, a blanket tucked around his knees. The house was quiet, but on my screen, the data was screaming. Jonathan and Grace were busy. They were currently inside a high-end boutique on the Rue Saint-Honoré. I knew this because the transaction alerts were rolling in like a ticker tape. Pending, the Ritz Paris, concierge, $2,000. Pending, Galeries Lafayette, $8,500. They were racking up debt at a terrifying speed. They had maxed out the primary credit cards and were now dipping into the emergency overdraft lines. Why? Because, at 9 a.m., Chicago time, the title company had sent an automated email. Preliminary closing disclosure. The document looked official: final numbers, fees, taxes, and the bold line at the bottom. Cash to seller, $852,000. Jonathan never noticed the watermark stamped across the page. Estimate. It wasn't money, just math. He saw the number, assumed the wire had landed, and went shopping in Paris. At the Quincy MS card hit or mess. Declined. Do not honor. Another attempt. Declined. Instead of calling the bank, he called the title company, where Sarah had already received my recorded revocation of his power of attorney. We cannot release the funds. Your authority was revoked. The affidavit you signed afterward is fraudulent. Escrow is frozen. The deal is dead. They were stranded with new debt, maxed cards, and a Ritz bill they couldn't pay. Furious, not remorseful. An hour later, payday loans pending. One-way tickets to Chicago. They were coming for me. The title company conference room was silent when Jonathan stormed in, Grace dragging luggage behind him. You did this, he snarled. I enforced the law, I said. You tried to sell a house you don't own with authority you no longer had. Grace dialed 911 and put it on speaker. My daughter kidnapped my father, she sobbed. He has dementia. She forced him to sign documents. When officers arrived, I stood calmly and handed them a card. Please reference case 492B filed with O'Hare Airport Police. Dispatch crackled back. Jonathan and Grace had abandoned Grandpa curbside, no ID, no medication, video logged. Teresa slid over a notarized affidavit proving Grandpa was lucid when Jonathan's authority was revoked. The officer turned away from me. Jonathan Miller, hands behind your back. Cuffs snapped shut. You're under arrest for bank fraud and elder abuse. Fix this, Jonathan whispered. I'm an auditor, I said. I expose mistakes. 6 months later, their assets were frozen, their cars repossessed, their reputations destroyed. Out on bail. Waiting for trial. Bankrupt. I drove back to Tennessee. Grandpa sat on the porch listening to jazz. Safe. Smiling. He didn't remember being abandoned, only that he was home. By the garage, I found the hidden for sale sign Jonathan had planned to plant. I snapped it in half and threw it on the firewood pile. They saw a spreadsheet. I saw a man worth protecting.